In this lesson, we're going to talk about some prerequisites that you should probably have under your belt before taking this course to make things a little bit easier to understand. Sometimes people will attack this sort of thing with hacking and things like that without actually having a full scope of knowledge of what's all entailed here. And some people will ask me, for instance, why would I want to learn Linux? Right? I'm a Windows guy. Well, because the majority of hacking tools out there are made in Linux. And plus, there's a lot of majority of web servers and such out there that we're attacking that are running Linux. Another thing is, if I were to attack or try to compromise a web server that was running Linux, a lot of times these Linux administrators, if you talk to many Linux administrators, you'll know and find that they don't really care for too many GUI tools. They prefer the shell. They prefer the command line version of everything because, one, it's a little bit more efficient performance-wise on the machine if it doesn't have to run a GUI on top of it. So that's one reason. The other reason is for automation and for consistency with scripts that they create. So a lot of times if you break into a machine, you're probably not going to get a GUI version of it if it's, for instance, Linux. But even if it was Windows, if you broke in just getting command shell, you still wouldn't have GUI interface. You would still have to know how to navigate via command line. So a lot of times when it comes to Linux, what I usually tell them is they say, okay, you got this big hack going on that you're going to do, blast into this guy's web server, and you've broken into Linux web server, and you're like, yes, pound, loving it, man, pwned it. Then we go, well, what's next? So yeah, you did all this little, intricate attack sequence and social engineering technique and got them to click on something and got a virus over there or whatever it may be. And you're like, yes, I now own the box. Well, great. Now what are you going to do? Because all you got in front of you is a flashing cursor on a command prompt. Really? I mean, you really got nothing. Yeah, you broke it in, but you got nothing that you can do. If you don't know how to navigate through a command line Linux, then you're screwed. If you don't know how to go ahead and make a PHP script using built-in text editors that are in command line instead of GUI, like Nano and Vi, then you're screwed. So in these cases, you need to make sure that you know, okay, what's the reasoning for learning some things like Linux and other things like that, and scripting in general. It's because of, your attacks that you're going to be doing are more than likely going to be, seeing a command line instead of a GUI in this case here. So we're going to talk a little bit about Linux, talk a little bit about how to set up a lab environment of your own using some tools like Virtualbox and things like that. And if we have some time, we'll get into some other prerequisites. But let's go ahead and start off with just a little bit of the primer to Linux. And I'll bring this up here. So with Linux, everything is based off of everything's basically a file in Linux. And I usually ask people, what does a / to the right mean? And I usually ask this of Linux people as well because I want to hear their response. And a lot of times people will say, well, that's root. Okay. So in this case here, if I were to go ahead and print my working directory, which is pwd, by the way, I can see I'm in root. Notice the / before the root. So in other words, if I ask the question again, what is that? You can't really tell me that's root because it's not. And the reason why is because if I do change directory, which is CD, over to that, you'll see that, yes, root is in there, but so is MNT, so is sbin, so is opt, so is proc. So in other words, it's the top of the file system. So don't be confused when you see that, but you have to understand that to understand the difference between what they call absolute and relative pathing. So if I navigate over to root here, oops, and I do ls. ls in this case means to list or directory listing of what's in this particular folder that I'm in. If I see things in blue, like desktop and word lists, I can assume now that this is what they call a directory or a folder. Okay, so in Windows, it's akin to a folder. In Linux, things are case sensitive, not Windows. Windows isn't case sensitive, but this is. So for instance, if I tried to change directory to desktop with a lowercase d, never heard of it. I did it with capital D, bing, there she be, loving it. So that's kind of giving you an idea of how, capitalization and such works in here. Now, the differences like between the absolute path and the relative path would be based off of where I'm at currently in the file system. Now, if I did a cd ... it's going to go up a directory back to root. And we already know in root, there's desktop. Okay. So I didn't have to type in cd/root/desktop. Okay? I didn't have to type that in to get to desktop. I could, but I didn't have to. All I did was typed in cd desktop. Why? Because it's relative to the path I was in. The folder was there. So for instance, now that I'm in desktop, what would I have to do to get back to root? Okay, so in this case here, unlike what I did here, if I were to try to go ahead and say cd root, not going to happen. Why? Because root is not in the desktop directory. If I do an ls, you'll see there's nothing in the desktop directory. So root, in this case, is not relative to desktop. Now, what is its absolute path? Well, its absolute path is the very beginning of the file system, which is this, slash right up here, and root. That's where it's at. So the entirety of the path, slash and root. So I would have to then say cd/root. That brings me back to root. Okay? Same thing as if I wanted to get to the web server. The web server is under var www. That's where the home page is at. Var is not in my relative directory here. Do you see a var there? No. So it's not relative to where I'm at. So I can't say cd var. Okay? It is relative to that. Okay? So the absolute path would be to start with the slash, then the var. And then if there's a directory in there, like www, I put that in as well. Then it takes me to that directory. Okay? Back again. If I want to go back to root, as you can see, there is no root here in its relative path. So I have to do /root, absolute path. Okay? So that's basically how you do that one. Now, another good skill to have is to make a user. So if you needed to add a user to the Linux operating system, by the way, I'm using what they call Debian version here. So there are many flavors of Linux, and the one I'm using currently is the Kali Linux one, which is based off of Debian. So some other ones have different ways of doing things. This is for Debian-based type of navigation. You'll see that most of it is the same across the board, but there are some nuances per different distributions. So let's add a user. We type in add user, and then I'll give myself my name, Ray. It's then going to go ahead and ask me for a password. So I'm just going to say password. It's going to ask me again for the password. Type it in. And then it's going to give me or ask me to fill in some other information, which I'm not going to worry about. So I'm just going to hit enter, 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 enter. Okay? But I basically made a user called Ray. Now, something to point out is that the top dog in Linux here would be root, and they have an ID number of 0. Anybody that's a standard user is going to get 1001 on one up. Now, there's also a group that I can get put into as well, but if it's a 1000, that means I am a standard user. Now, me, currently, I am root. But if I wanted to go ahead and navigate over to Ray, or B Ray, I can just type in SU for switch user, Ray. Now if I do an ID, you'll see that I am 1000, which means that I'm actually standard user here. Okay? Then if I just wanted to get back to root, I can just say SU, give the password for root, which in this case for Kali is Tor, and I am back to root. Now, what about if I wanted to give Ray the privilege to do something? Okay. In this case, in akin to Windows, the run is administrator. So let's say I needed to give some administrative privileges. I would put this particular user in a group called sudo. So I'd say add user, Ray, and then I say sudo. So he's in the sudoer group, basically. Okay. So now, if I were to go ahead and jump over to Ray, and I were to try to add a user, wingnut, it's going to tell me can't do it. Okay? Because I'm not administrator. I need to be administrator to be able to do the add user command. So what about if I did sudo add user wingnut eventually. There we go. So in this case here, it's asking now for the password for Ray. So I already know what it is, my word password. And I've now gotten the ability to add a user. The first time I couldn't do it because I'm just a standard user. So in order to stay as a standard user, but still do administrative tasks like adding users, I start off with the sudo, and then from there I do whatever I need to do. Okay. All right. Throw that in. Good, good, good. And let me navigate back again to root. All right. So that's the basic way that you can do that. Now, how do you just make files without any text in them? You can just say the word touch and then have a word or a file that you want to call it. So I'll say test1.txt. And what it will do is it will make a blank text document called test1. Now, if I decided I wanted to copy that to a different location, I can say the cp command. Now, in this case here, we know that this test1.txt is relative to where I'm at. It's in my directory, so I can say test1.txt, but the place I want to put it, let's say, is desktop. Okay. In this case, desktop is also relative to where I'm at. Okay. So now, if I were to go here, notice how I didn't have to do any /root or anything like that. So if I go here to CD over to desktop, okay, you can see there's my file. If I were to make another one, test2.txt, if I wanted to go ahead and copy this to my root, root is not relative to me, but test2.txt is. So I can still say cp test2.txt, but for the actual destination, I now have to do /root. Okay. So now if I navigate back, you can see there's test2.txt. All right. So knowing where you're at, again, the relative versus absolute is absolutely essential. Now, another way I can do things is I can move a file somewhere else as well. So if I made one here, I'll say test3.txt. If I wanted to go ahead and move that, it's mv, and then the name of the file, and then the destination. So again, test3.txt. Because desktop is relative to me, I can just say desktop, and it will physically move it from this location to that location. Because you saw here in my current directory that I had test3, but now if I run ls, you'll see test3 is gone because it's in my desktop. So it's not just copying, it's physically moving the file. Okay? All right. Now, another thing you can do as well is you can use a command called cat, but you can also use what they call a redirect symbol, which is the bracket going to the right if I want to do that. I can also use something called an echo command. So in this case here, oh, wait a minute. Actually, I forgot to show you how to remove a file. To remove a file, you do rm. Okay, so you can say rm test2.txt. Sorry about that. I forgot about showing you that one. All right, now you can also do an echo command. So let's say I said echo Chuck Norris makes Happy Meals cry. Okay, done in quotations. Okay, like that. It's going to basically repeat what I have done here. Now, what about if I were to go ahead and hit that, but this time do a bracket to the right, test1.txt. Now, in order to view, to see what's in test1.txt and to view it here in our terminal, we would use the cat command. So I can say cat test1.txt. And you can clearly see that I echoed what was there in that phrase, and I did the bracket to the right, which meant redirect it, put it into this other file called test1.txt. Okay? So that's how you can redirect that. Now, If I were deciding to go ahead and echo again and say Angelina Jolie rules, okay, and I hit enter again, you'll notice that it doesn't append it. It actually overwrites it. Okay? And that's important to remember, because if you're trying to break into somebody's SSH authorized keys file and add yourself to theirs, and you still want to remain anonymous, you don't want to overwrite his SSH key there. You want to append yours. So appending is very key skill to have in Linux. But for that, you do 2 brackets. So I would do an echo again for, let's say, this one here. And I would do 2 brackets going to the right. Okay? Now, if I were to cat this, you'll see it has the first line that I had originally, and then the second line. Okay? So that's a way that you can do it there as well. Now, another thing to recall as well, or to remember, is how to do what they call permissions. Permissions are important to know about. If I do an ls-l, you'll notice here that I've got some that say D and some that say a dash. Let's take a look at what we got here. So looking at the file, if this first position has a dash, it is a basic file like a text file. And if it says a D, that means it's a directory. Okay? So this is the indicator to say what it is. Then the next 3 positions stand for something called owner of the file. So me, being the creator owner of it here, that would be me, apparently has read-write privileges, because the R is for read, the W is for write. If there was an X in the 3rd position, it stands for executable. Now in this case, there's nothing really to execute, so it's left as a dash. So no execute privileges, just read and write for the owner. The next section is group, the group that I'm in. In this case, read only. Notice there's a dash where the W is supposed to be, meaning no write, and a dash where the execute is, meaning no execute. And then the last one is for everybody else. So everybody else gets read access as well. How many instances of the file are there? 1. Who's the owner? Root. What's the group? Root. What's the size? 56 bytes. What's the date of creation and time? Right there. What's the name of the file? Right there. Okay? Now I can change how these things go by using something called chmod. Now to understand chmod, you have to understand how they do permissions in Linux. So we're going to use the numbered notation here. 7 is full perms. 6 is read and write. 5 is read and execute. 4 is read only. 3 is write and execute. 2 is write only. Oops. 1 is execute only, and 0 is no permissions. Okay? And the syntax they use is something called chmod. Now, if I wanted to give permissions in this manner, I would have to say basically which permissions are given to what group or what set of identities. So we already know the first set, the first 3 in my file from back. Let's see, where's that? Back here. So the first 3 we already know is owner. So let's say I want to give the owner all privileges. Okay, all privileges. That would be 7, right? Full perms. That's just for that one. Now let's say I want to give the ability for the group to have read-write access. Well, read and write is 6. And let's say I want to give the everybody else group read only. That's a 4. Okay? Then you give the name of the file. That's it. So let's go test that out. So over here, we'll say chmod 764 test1.txt, enter. So you see before we had rw dash R dash dash and R dash dash. So I'm going to run ls stack l again. Now you'll see RWX, RW dash, and R dash dash. Okay. Now you can also do it another way by using what they call letter notation. U equals user slash owner. G equals group. O equals others. Then lastly, this is typically called world. And then A would be all. Let's say I wanted to grant the group the ability for, I don't know, writing. Okay? Just write. I only want them to be able to write. It's going to be difficult to do without read, but just for purposes of my demonstration here. I can do a chmod, and then I can say G. Then what do I want to do? I want to add some permissions to it. So I do a plus. W. Actually, let's just give him RW. Okay. Actually, we'll give them all three. RWX, because I think the last one that we did was for the group was RW, right? Yeah, RW. So we're going to add the executable to it. So G plus RWX and then the name of the file. So let's go back here. chmod G plus RWX test1 dot txt. And now let's run our ls stack l. And you can see right here that we have our RWX listed there. Same thing we can go if we do a chmod G minus RX. Okay. Test1.txt. ls stack l. You can see that we've given it just right privileges for the group. So minus takes away privileges, plus adds privileges. All right. So that's the basics of permissions. Next, let's move on into how you can use the built-in text editor in command prompt or in the shell. One of the more famous ones is nano. So if you type in the word nano and then say chuck1.txt, I can spell today. It'll open up a editor that's in the shell. So from here, I can just start typing in stuff. Alexander, let's see, hold on. When Alexander Graham Bell first invented the telephone, he had 2 missed calls from Chuck Norris. Right? So I put some text in there and I'm good to go. After I've written my text, the basics of how to use this, there's more involved with this tool, but we won't get deep into that. The basics of it is you write stuff and then you do Control X and it's going to ask you, do you want to save what you've written? I'll say Y and then it'll say file name to write. I'm going to keep the same file name and enter. So now if I were to cat chuck1.txt, I can see it here. It has all of my text in there. Fairly easy to use, nothing too difficult. But you can write simple scripts in there that you were broken into a guy's machine that was Linux command line, and you can use the built-in nano editor to create PHP scripts or whatever you need. Another one that a lot of people like to use is Vi, and it does kind of the same thing, but a little bit different. We'll say chuck2.txt. Now this one here, if you start trying to type in, it will not let you start typing in because you have to hit I to go into insert mode. So you have to take additional steps to start typing things in. Okay? So you can just say Chuck Norris has been to Mars. That's why there's no signs of life. Okay? Now when you're done, you hit escape to get out of insert mode. Okay? And then you'll do a colon WQ, which means write and quit. So we're basically saying save it and quit. And on the bottom left, you'll see the colon there and then the WQ. And it brings you back to this menu here. So then again, chuck2.txt, and there you go. Okay? So that's some of the basic editor stuff. Like I said, we're not going to get super deep into any of that kind of stuff, but that's kind of how you can mess with that. All right. Another one is grep. You got to have to know what grep is because it's a way to find things in large files. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and nano movies.txt. I'm going to put in my top 3 movies of all time. Number 1, Warrior. Love that movie. Not the old one, the one in 2011. The MMA one. So favorite movie of all time, I put favorite. And I'll say 2, next favorite is 300. Love that movie. Favorite 2. And then 3, Braveheart. Yeah. And favorite 3. Okay. So I'm making a list here, and you can see it. That I've got a list called movies, and it's got 3 different sections to it. Yeah, every single row has 3 sections to it. It's got the number, it's got the name of the movie, and it's got the word favorite something. Okay. So let's say that I wanted to go ahead and find the word warrior in my file movies.txt. I can say grep warrior, and then the name of the file movies.txt, and it will return the entire line. Okay? It'll return the entire line, not just the word. Now, what about if I just wanted to find the particular word and I knew, for instance, the column that it's in? So in this case, it's in the second column, so I can say grep warrior movies.txt, and then I can use something called a pipe symbol. Pipe symbol allows me to take the output from the first command and put it into the next command. So whatever the values are for this first text, which is what you see above, gets put into this next command. And the command I'm going to use here is a cut command, and we're going to use -D for delimiter, and the delimiter is equal to a space. The reason why I did that is because our delimiter here to separate the columns is a space. See the space right here? Okay, so we're doing a space for the delimiter, and I'm choosing -F for field, which means column number 2. I'm looking for warrior, and I'm looking for that particular line in the movies.txt, but I only want it to show me the second field, which in this case is warrior. Now, if I still wanted to go with warrior, grep warrior, but I wanted to see what was in the third column, which in this case is favorite, I would do a 3 for field. Now it shows me favorite. Okay, so that's kind of how you would use grep to your advantage. Pretty awesome stuff. All right, next, you're going to have to know a little bit about some basics of Netcat, because Netcat is a well-known used hacker tool. It's called the Swiss Army knife of hackers, so it's a good idea to be able to know how to use this bad boy. Now, Netcat comes by default on Unix and Linux here on this Kali Linux, but it's not on the Windows 7 one that I'm going to use. But I've already put it on the Windows 7 one, so we actually have it on both. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this by typing in nc-h to show you a help file. I'm going to move this help file off to the side, and we're going to reference that in a few minutes. All right, so what I'm going to type in here is we're going to do a basic communication with another machine, a basic connection, TCP connection. Okay, so I'm going to type in nc-lvp1234 and hit enter. What is this doing? Well, first off, the L stands for listening mode. Now, this is not persistent. Capital L is for persistence. So this is just basically opening up a port and listening. The V is for verbose information, and the P is for port. So I said listen on port 1234. So if I were to come over here to another machine, a Windows, let's say, and I said NC, actually, hold on. Yeah, let me make sure I'm in. Okay, I want to make sure my Netcat was in there. So I'm going to say NC 172.17.19.67, which is the machine address of my Kali Linux, the one that's listening, and the port was 1234. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so I'm netcatting from this machine to the IP address over there, specifically connecting to the 123 port, or I'm sorry, 1234 port. Now I'm going to say, what's up? Okay. I'm going to come over here to Kali. And you can see right there, it says it. Then I'm going to say, what's up with you? Back to Windows 7. And there you go. So basically, we just made a chat client. How awesome is that, huh? So it's a basic TCP connection tool. It's pretty awesome. Let me Control C out of that. Back here to Kali. Going back to Kali. Okay, close that out there. Oops, actually, I'm sorry. I don't know why I closed that out. Open that back up. All right. So that's the basics of how you would actually use that one. Now, how could you use it maliciously? Well, in this case, a terminal window in Linux is called bash shell. It's in the location bin bash. And if I were to be a Windows 7 attacker, let's say I was on Windows 7 and I was attacking and I wanted terminal access to your Linux machine. You're my victim. You got a Linux machine. I want terminal access. How would I do that? Well, I could set up a backdoor that does something like this. NC-LVP1234 and then -E/bin/bash. Okay. Now the -E in this case, you can see here it says dangerous. Okay. It's basically saying if somebody connects, run this program. So for example, in Linux, I can run the word ls and it understands it. Okay. I can run the word ID. It understands it. If I go over here to Windows on its command line and I do ls, it doesn't understand it. ID doesn't understand it. Okay, so I'm pointing that out to prove that I am going to connect into a bash shell. So I'm going to go ahead and run again my netcat. Let it connect. It'll take a minute or so to do the connect. And then I'm going to type in ID. A normal Windows command prompt won't understand it, but if I'm actually running it on a bash shell, it'll understand it. So if it gives me some output here, it tells me I've broken in. There we go. So it tells me I've actually connected into that victim's Linux machine, and I can see clearly here that I can run all types of commands. I can do a cat/etc/shadow to get all the hashes. Okay, I've now basically compromised it. It's a good way to make a backdoor. Now the same thing can be done on the Linux side when it comes to Windows. So for instance, if I said NC-LVP1234 and then I said -ECMD.exe, that is the command version or the name of the Windows version of command prompt. So on the flip side of it, in reverse, I'm making my listener now on the Windows. So in other words, if I compromised the machine and I wanted to gain access later, I put netcat on there and I set it up as a listener. Because on Kali, I can just come over here and say NC 172.17.19.65, which is the Windows 7, 1234. And in a second, you should see that I get command prompt. Give it a second, and there we go. ipconfig/all, and there we go. Okay? That is basically how you can go ahead and create kind of a backdoor in that environment. Okay? Pretty awesome stuff to be able to run that. So that's kind of the basics of using netcat to your advantage. There's a lot of different Linux that you can actually get involved and learn, and I'll let you guys learn a lot of that stuff kind of on your own. But I want to give you some basic stuff. Okay? Nothing too humongously large in scope, but just some of the basics, you know, how to navigate around, how to write text documents, how to look at directories, what the difference is between absolute and relative pathing, and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of a beginner level, if you will, to get you introduced to the Linux file system, including the permissions as well. Now, another good, important skill to have as an ethical hacker is to keep everything self-contained so that you don't get in trouble. And by doing that, you make what they call a virtual environment. Now, I'm going to stick with some free tools here, but you can choose any hypervisor that you want. I'm using Virtualbox here, I also recommend Hyper-V is a good one as well, especially if you got Windows 8 Pro or Windows 10 Pro or Windows 8.1 Pro. It comes for free on those versions. But VirtualBox is free. VMware Workstation is also free. I don't prefer that one. It's just my preference. I prefer this VirtualBox instead. So I'm going to show you on here how I've made my lab environment, or what things to look for when you make a lab environment. Now, in this case here, you're going to have an ISO version, either an eval version of the Windows operating systems or a legitimate copy, obviously, in order to make Windows operating system VMs. For Linux ones, it's not so much, right, because most of those are free, and you can create servers and stuff with those, so that's a free way to do it. But if you do have licensing for it, then you have the capability, or if you go to an eval, like they have a 180-day eval for Server 2012, if you go to Microsoft's page and download the eval, you can get started with that, working on that. Now for me, I go ahead and use a Server 2012 as my router. And with my router here, I basically have different settings. The basic way that you would do something like this is you would click on New, and then you would give it a name. So you can call it Router. And for me, I chose to use Server 2012. So I would pick, they don't have it. What's up with that? All right, we'll go with the next best thing, 2008, I guess. And then from there, usually what I'll do is I'll pick my memory. Now keep in mind, if you're doing virtualization, a few things to keep in mind is you need plenty of RAM on your host machine. So if you got a host machine that's only got 4 gig of RAM, you're not going to be running too many virtual machines, if at all. So you still have to have RAM to dedicate to your host machine so it doesn't crash. So my recommendation is at least minimum probably 8 gig of RAM, and also the amount of hard drive space to be able to hold all the VMs. Because most of the VMs that I create are around 40 gig a piece, but I store them on an external hard drive. So that's not such a big deal to me. But you're going to probably have to dole out the amount of RAM that normally would be doled out to the machine as if it were physical. So Server 2012, for example, would better be served with at least 1 gig of RAM. Even though the minimum requirements say 512, it's best served with 1 gig, or else it's going to be really, really slow. So to do that, in memory, you say 1024 for RAM. Okay? And you can give out as much as you want, depending on how much RAM you actually physically have. Then you'll create a virtual hard disk. You can choose any of these formats. I choose VDI. And then here you got dynamically allocated versus fixed size. Dynamically allocated is going to be a little bit more hit on your performance because it's allocating as it grows, or it grows with it. Fixed size says I'm going to allocate 20 gig and it's that. No matter if I use it or not, it's still 20 gig. For now, I'll just kick with dynamically allocated. And then here, up in the folder icon, you'll choose where you're going to hold it. So if you have an external hard drive that you want to put them on, this is where you choose it. Okay. And for me, for 2012, I usually go with about 40 gig because I add some roles. I add like router and I add DHCP and stuff. And then you click on Create. Now what I recommend is once you've created it, you'll have it in the menu over here, and then you'll click on Settings, and you can review what you've had. Okay, all the things that you've done. So if you want to change anything after the fact, this is where you do it. If you want to add more processors, this is where you do it. Okay, acceleration, that sort of thing. Sometimes you want to have a high display, 128 meg, 3D acceleration. Storage is where you have a DVD and you have probably a hard drive. But you click on the controller, and then here down the plus symbol is where you add in a DVD drive or a hard drive. So if you put a DVD drive in and a hard drive, typically what you're going to be doing is the DVD drive itself. Well, actually, when you create the VM, if you did it the way I did it, you'll actually have a hard drive already there. Okay. Then you'll just add the optical drive, and once you've done that, you'll pick and choose over here the ISO file containing the operating system. Okay, so if you want to install Kali Linux, for instance, there it is. Okay. Under the network, this is important. If you're not doing, if you're just practicing hacking techniques and such, I probably recommend sticking it with just internal. Now, in my case, I've made a router here, so I've actually had 2 network adapters. One is external, going to the internet, and one is internal. Okay, that's just for me, the way I've done this one. I always recommend you stick with internal network and obviously keep them all within the same name. I just stuck with the default name they give us. I don't really care about that. You can change it to whatever you want, okay? But internal network does not communicate with the internet, nor does it communicate with your physical host. So when you're doing that DDoS, if you watch my other previous video about denial of service, this is the mode you want it in for your VMs. You do not want host only, nor do you want NAT or bridged, okay? Host only will let you communicate with the host, but not the internet. And then bridged and NAT will go ahead and let you communicate over the internet with your existing NIC card. Some other things like USB I'm not really concerned about. I'm going to cancel out of that. Another one that's important is the Linux one. Now, depending on what version of Linux you're using will determine how you set this up. So for me, when I did my original Kali, I just called it Cal, or Kali, I'll just call it Kali. And then Linux is what you want. Now, Kali Linux, if you're using it, is going to be based off of Debian. And you're going to want to probably go with 64-bit if that's the one you downloaded. Then hit Next. If you're using the 1.0 version like I was showing in my videos this week, I would recommend high amounts of RAM because it's RAM, for me at least, it ran extremely slow and laggy as a gig of RAM. I bumped it up to 2 gig of RAM. Now, if you get the newer versions, Kali 2.0 or 2016, I found that I could run it efficiently with 1 gig of RAM. So they must have done optimization with it or something because it runs a heck of a lot better with memory in the newer versions. So if you get the new versions of Kali, which would be what you get now if you go download it, you can change that. For me, I changed mine to 2048. Create a virtual hard disk again, same thing. Everything still applies. The only difference I would say is sometimes under your settings here, sometimes you'll come across issues. And the issue that I usually come across is usually fixed with selecting enable PAE NX. NX is typically reserved for NICs, otherwise known as Unix. So sometimes if you're having problems, with your Linux VM, enabling this will help, I've noticed. But everything else I've kept basically the same. What's kind of cool about Linux is you can run live CDs. In other words, run the VM on top of another physical hard drive and run the entire operating system. So that's kind of cool, but you can add that in there as well. Networking, same thing. Keep it internal. Now, the only reason I would switch it to NAT or bridge is originally at the beginning if you want to add things to it. Okay? And I'll probably put some documentation if I can find my documentation in our course here about my setup and some of the vulnerable apps I put in so that I can practice. But that's what I would use to set up the Kali stuff. Let's see here. Windows 7, another one. This is typical. Same setup as the Server 2012. Really haven't changed anything there as well. So same thing. Display, network, all that stuff is exactly the same. Now there is one here like the Metasploitable 2. If you go to a website called Vuln Hub, you're going to find a lot of pre-created server environments that you can screw around with. And these are purposely vulnerable, which is why you do not want to connect them to your internet. I'll rephrase that, or I'll restate that. Do not connect it to your internet. Keep it as internal only. But you can usually download. Now, some of these are really difficult. So if you're a beginner, you're probably going to not do too well with this. Because a lot of these are pretty difficult. But they're basically capture the flag, challenges, right? All kinds of good stuff. But if you get that Metasploitable 2, that's the one I've been using throughout the week for breaking into and also doing the web app stuff. That Metasploitable 2 actually comes in the format of VMDK, which is a VMware workstation. So to do that one, you do new and call it whatever you want to call it. And then you would go here and select use an existing virtual hard disk file. Then from there, you'll surf for your VMDK. Okay, so in this case, this is a VMDK. All right, so that's the only difference really. Once you've done that, you can just click create because it's already pre-created for you. They actually have some Kali Linuxes that are in VMware Workstation format, so you can download there, but they also have some in VDI as well for Virtualbox. But you'll see here I've got a variety of different victims and stuff. So basically what I do whenever I teach any of this stuff is I bring up my router, which also has DHCP on it, and all the actual router, the DHCP will give out addresses to all of my virtual machines that I bring up from then on. So all of them get addressed by this machine. Plus, I have them give a default gateway, so if I do need to get out to the internet with anything, I can do that. Now, I don't recommend that for those that aren't familiar with networking because, again, these are going to be purposely vulnerable systems, and you don't want to be exposed to the internet. So you don't need that. You don't need the routing capability. I do recommend the DHCP if you know how to set one up to give addresses. If not, you're going to have to statically assign all your addresses if you set it as internal. So I usually bring up my router, and then I bring up my Kali. After that, I just pick and choose what I'm attacking. Whether I'm attacking a domain controller, whether I'm attacking my Ubuntu, Windows 7, Windows XP, Linux lab there, whatever it may be. And I recommend, again, if you go to all of these different sites like Vuln Hub here, you're going to find a bunch of these. These are all in ISO format. You'll just click on download, and they'll have an ISO format that you'll actually use. And then basically they'll tell you, like for this one here, this one has vulnerabilities for SQL injection. So this would be a good practice tool if you're trying to learn that. Okay? A lot of times it will tell you how to extract it, how to do it, how to put it in. But most of the time it's an ISO file. And if it's an ISO file, you just put it in there just like you normally would set it up in Virtualbox. Okay? To start them, you just select them and you click on Start. Now here's another key thing. Is if you were to go ahead and install Server 2012 on this machine before you actually made it into a router and you did all that stuff, okay? Brand new clean install. It's imperative that you go to the top right and click on Snapshots and then click on this little blue thing right here and make a snapshot, okay? That will allow you to go ahead and name it, and I highly recommend you fill out the description. So it will tell you exactly what it was for, okay? So a lot of times you'll go ahead and show details. It'll show the details listed here of what it would do. So like this one here I think has some details. Let's see here. Show details. So like this one I'm telling myself this is a clean import. If it was a clean install, say it. Make a snapshot of it. That way if you start screwing around with things and you install things that you're testing and things don't work right and it breaks your system, then you can just roll back to the snapshot of when it was a clean install. Pretty sweet, huh? And what I usually do is I install a bunch of vulnerabilities on these victims, like vulnerable applications and all kinds of cool stuff. Then I save it. That way, if I want to go in there and start breaking things and practicing, if I do, which I probably will break things, I can just roll back to when I had installed all the tools. And that way I don't have to install them all again. It's pretty awesome. Take advantage of snapshots. They're definitely going to be your friend. Okay? So that is kind of some basic prerequisite stuff that you would need. A little bit of Linux knowledge, a little bit of how to make virtual machines. There's a few other things that you should probably know, like how to do conversions and things like that, and some basic scripting, but we won't get into that in this beginner course here. But that's hopefully helping you out a little bit with some of the prerequisites for doing ethical hacking.